Hello and welcome to Fatima Today. This show is produced by the World Apostolate of Fatima USA, Our Lady's Blue Army, and brings topics to you, our viewers, related to the events in the world today. We live in tumultuous times when logic seems to have disappeared and uncertainty hangs over us. Our hope on these programs is to address the issues of the day and find solutions through adherence to the laws of God, especially through the message of Fatima. We ask that you subscribe to this podcast. Francisco and Jacinta Marto were the two youngest seers at Fatima, being just 9 and 7 years old when Our Lady appeared in 1917, and even younger when the angel appeared to them in 1916. About a year after the apparitions ended, they both contracted the terrible influenza from the pandemic that spread worldwide in 1918. Francisco suffered for 6 months with the flu and died in April of 1919. Jacinta was asked by the Blessed Mother if she would stay a little longer on earth and suffer for souls in need of salvation. She said yes, and went through a series of hospital stays where treatment and operations were performed to no avail, really, in curing her. She died alone in a hospital in Lisbon on February 20th, 1920, just as Our Lady had predicted. The two saints were beatified by Pope John Paul II on May 13th of 2000 and canonized by Pope Francis on May 13th, 2017. They are the patron saints of captives and prisoners, sick people, bodily illness, Portuguese children, and people mocked for their piety. My guest today is Barb Ernster, Communications Director for the World Apostolate of Fatima, to discuss this upcoming feast day, February 20th, of these two young saints. Welcome, Barb.
Oh, thanks, Dave. Glad to be on with you.
Yeah, it's a little intro into them, and it really talks a lot about them, their holy little lives in such a short. They really put you to shame, don't you? When you think when you think about them.
Well, they were certainly on a fast track.
Yeah.
But I also believe they had very special graces, and the Lord directed them intently so that they would show us a form of holiness through the Fatima message.
Well, I think there's this simplicity of children. Okay, bring the children to me. That's what Christ said. I mean, and I think that's really what it is. We have to be childlike in our spirituality, in our holiness. If we want to be holy, we have to be childlike in our spirituality, not childish. And there's a big difference. Okay, we have to be. We have to understand that there is, we have to mature. And I've always had a great affection for Sister Lucia. Hopefully, be Saint Lucia sometime soon. But I guess because as an adult, I can relate to her better.
Right.
But every once in a while, you look at these children and you think, God, could I just be that simple?
Well, they were told early on they would go to heaven. And so, of course, that's what their focus was. They just believed the beautiful lady who radiated the light of God. And that's what's so beautiful about them as children. They didn't have time to discern. They didn't have anybody guiding them. They just had these experiences with her that told them internally this was real, and they were so enamored by her beauty that they wanted to do anything for her. And so that's, they had let go of the world very quickly.
Well, they let go of the world probably because they never really had it, which really is a gift, when you think about it. Okay, we are so lost in the world, especially in 21st century Western world, America. But overall, not just us. I mean, even the people of that day were lost. And people think that how bad things are today, and they are with morality and that. But the Roaring '20s weren't exactly a time of piety in this country and in the world, right? So there are, and God tempered that, I think, with the Great Depression, with World War II. And I think that is they didn't attach themselves to these things. I love speaking to religious, like especially the mendicant sort of religious, where they have remained removed from all of the trappings of the day, And I mean, even this morning I was getting ready to do this podcast, and something popped up. It's a banking issue. Something popped up with something else. So 2 hours later, I'm doing what I wanted to start doing at 8 o'clock. Well, that's just the way it works. And I think, but we are in this world, and we have to deal with it, and we have to make the best of it. We have to sanctify ourselves, and that's what the daily duty. And this is our daily duty. It's not the same. I want to mention our late Deacon Bob Ellis, who passed away last month, of course, very close to us. And he was suffering from cancer. And he made a comment to me because he said, I want to offer this up like Jacinta offered up everything. And I remember speaking to him soon afterwards. He said, he goes, I'm no Jacinta, he goes. I said, well, you know what? You're not, but she's
Right.
not Deacon Bob either. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think we all have to understand we're called to a different type of holiness. And,
Right.
it's all holiness, but a different type of a different road to holiness, And,
Right.
and yeah, I would love to think that I could have the simplicity of these children when I'm called to that end time and prepare for it,
I always say I would have made a good Israelite grumbling in the desert. So
yeah, that's right. I would do pretty good at that
yeah.
too, Yeah. But I think
Well,
that
the interesting thing about Francisco and Jacinta is how different they were in their personalities and even in their ability to grasp intellectually and their spiritual charisms. And yet God worked within them and drew them to holiness through their own individual personality and their receptive hearts. And I think that's what's so interesting about these two. As close as they were in age, they were completely different.
they were.
And even Jacinta, Francisco was so docile and to the point that it exasperated Lucia that she could tell him to go sit somewhere and he would sit there until she said it was okay to get up. I mean, she would be amazed at how easily he was taken advantage of, how docile he was, but yet at the same time, he had a hard time grasping, his catechism. And so with studies and trying to grasp things intellectually, it was harder for him, but then God opened him up to grasp him spiritually and internally, and Francisco really responded to that.
I think it's a statement and it's a real statement for us in this age when we rationalize everything, when we are educated. And I say that with a very small e, because how educated truly are we? He was educated through his heart.
Right.
And I think that really makes a big difference. Not everybody is a great student. Not everybody is a great reader, the great person to understand the written word, the spoken word, or the taught word, but they're open to the inspirations that come from God. And I just the reality of I always say that the apparitions of the angel of peace were really the most formative for these children. And Sister Lucia would say that later too. And that was no disrespect meant to Our Lady and the monumental message and mission that she gave them. But if they hadn't been formed by the angel in a year earlier, would they have been able to grasp it? Okay, even with the limited vision that Saint Francisco had,
Mm-hmm.
he knew in his heart where he was. Okay, he knew what they were experiencing. He knew on a spiritual plane. I think maybe even more so than the other two, because again, it was here with him. He had to take it more on faith.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't hear her. He could see this image. He knew what this was, but he had to take it more as an internal type of thing. And I really believe that was that, and that goes right with his personality too.
Right. And he did feel God in him when the angel gave them the Eucharist. And I find it interesting that even Our Lady started with the Eucharist. She started with her son, gives
Yeah,
them this experience of God
yeah,
before they even experience her.
yeah.
And, Francisco took to that immediately. And he also took to the words of the angel who demanded they make reparation and console their God, make reparation for the crimes of humanity. These kids probably had very limited understanding of the depth of sin
And
because they
what were
were
the crimes of humanity? How
right.
could they even understand it? Really, this
Right.
little
But
girl.
they did feel, Francisco felt the outrage of God. He felt the sadness. He knew internally that it was great. And
Yeah,
so maybe he even participated in a little bit about what, our Lord participated in the Garden of Gethsemane.
yeah,
Maybe he felt some of that.
yeah.
So, I mean, he responded with his heart, and he always would say, he'd go off on by himself and he'd say, Jacinta and Lucia would say, "What are you doing?" He'd say, "I'm thinking about God.
Thinking
I'm
about God.
thinking about God." He was pondering this constantly. He always wanted to be alone. And of course, this led him to be such a great intercessor before the tabernacle in the church.
Well, the hidden Jesus, as he spoke
Right.
when he would walk in. And I always think of that, and that's always stayed with me because even yesterday I was in one chapel here, and I just happened to be just walked in for something. I just stopped to say a decade of the Rosary because I hadn't finished it earlier in the day, and I was kneeling in front of the tabernacle, and, the hidden Jesus. Okay. The first thing that came to my mind was Francisco and his statement, the hidden Jesus. He's there, truly present, and you're there talking to God. Okay. He did that. He understood that. And I think that was really the key to his sanctity, but also the key to his example, as to what he laid out for people. Because his was more of truly, there was more faith involved for him, I believe, than for the other two.
He was very confident in his prayers before Jesus. There's a couple of stories where he would bring a very almost an impossible situation that somebody in the village was dealing with. He would bring it to prayer, and he was able to come out and say, your prayer will be answered in a few days. And God would work it out in a way that nobody could ever imagine, and their prair was answered.
There were some specifics too about that. I think that some specific stories about that. I mean, that you're.
Yes, there's one where he overheard his sister Teresa, or it was Lucia's sister Teresa, talking about a couple in the village, and the man was supposed to be drafted into World War I. The woman was ill with a serious condition, plus they had a young child, and there was no way he could leave the family and go off to war. Francisco took it to prayer, and he came back out and he said, tell Teresa God will answer their prayer. And the night before this man was supposed to go into the war, he came down with a bad fever, and they couldn't take him because he was sick. And his wife ended up being cured, and the two of them were able to remain together as a family. So that, Francisco didn't pray specifically. He just prayed confidently that the Lord would work this out.
Would work it out. And I think that's interesting, because we pray for specific ends to things. Okay, well, I know that this is how it should end. So God, I'm praying that you do this for me. Instead of saying, what is the best way for this to work out? Okay, what is the best way for this situation? My vision of it is not your vision necessarily. Maybe it is, but not in every case. I think that's what we have to do, because we are on a, we have to accept that God has the plan.
Right.
Okay. And I think that being the case, we have trouble with that, because again, especially who we are today, who, we just know everything. That's all there is to it.
Well, we have all of our machines and our technology that works things out for us. And so that's how we think. But God is so above all of it. And so it's hard to sometimes imagine how he will work something out when it seems like there's no way out. But he can.
Yeah. No, it's very, very true. Now, moving on to Saint Jacinta. I mean, we're speaking to them in the pre-canonization days, I guess, because they speak another time. But she was so different.
Yes.
I mean, she was this peppery little kid, and defiant. I mean, she truly was. If you look at the pictures of her, sometimes I mean, it's just like she got that look on her, like a scowl on her face, like she knew exactly what she was going to do. And I think, I guess. I mean, the stereotypes say that boys tend to be more aggressive than girls, but not at those young ages. It's a fact. I mean, girls do mature earlier, and she just had everything she wanted. She was, very young in this family. They were Jacinta Francisco were the products of her mother's second marriage, after her first husband had died, and so she had these older siblings, And I think, it's kind of like, she was like the caboose, I like to call it, in the family, and always, picked up everything from the other kids. Now she knew where she wanted to go. But it just, she did have a zest for life.
Yes.
And
she was very petulant. She could be petulant too. She wanted to win, whereas Francisco didn't care if he lost.
Didn't care. Yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal for him. Maybe not at that point, And I think that it is really, it just kind of states who these children are. But she had such a great desire for the mission. Okay, she truly had a love of soul, as they all did. But hers was a I think she really felt the depth of the call.
The call to the salvation of souls. She was so impacted by the vision of hell.
And she just knew her comment after the vision of hell. She said, why would anybody want to go there?
Right.
Okay. So she understood the gravity of this, which I mean, if you and I today saw a vision of hell, we would probably be just, probably our hearts would stop for hours. It's a scary thing. But they were given such a profound understanding of what they were looking at, And I think that is, and she took it on to herself to just to work for, for the salvation of souls, so that, because I don't know. I mean, I think that I don't know at what point did they receive the depth each individually, all three of them, I guess, for that matter. Obviously, as we've said earlier, they were formed with the angel. But they really, by the time the third apparition happened, where they saw the vision of hell,
Mhm.
if that had happened on the first day of those previous five apparitions, right, the three of the angel, two of Our Lady, could they have handled that? I mean,
Well, that's what's interesting, Dave, because before that, twice before, they experienced the light that radiated from Our Lady's hands. So they already had been immersed in God. They understood what God was.
yeah,
They understood, they felt him interiorly from the angel. They
yeah,
saw the beauty and the pure white and the brilliance of the light that surrounded the angel and Mary. So they
yeah,
had an experience of God that even Francisco said, we couldn't put words to this, what we experienced. So then in July, they see the vision of hell. They see the vision of the third secret of the Pope going through a city half in ruins, the people being killed, the church actually going to its own Calvary.
yeah,
They
yeah,
see the angel about to strike the earth. So they see the punishment that God wants to bring down on mankind for the crimes that humanity is committing. Then they see hell, which is the ultimate punishment.
yeah.
So they're seeing all this, yet they're not understanding the great prophecies of Russia, the consecration to the Immaculate. That part, they didn't understand that because that was going to be for Lucia later.
That was putting it into temporal terms, which Lucia was going to have to disseminate later on.
Right.
She was going to be the adult.
Yes.
You'll be here a while longer. Our Lady told her a while longer, 88 years longer. But she was going to now be the adult that came from the
Right.
Fatima apparitions. And I
Francisco
think of that third part of the secret. And not to go off subject, but when people talk about, God, was this revealed? Was it? Well, you know what? Doesn't it make sense what we saw there? The passion of the church in
right.
these times. Okay, the Holy Father will have much to suffer. That came from the beginning. Okay, that wasn't something that was revealed in 2000.
Mhm.
I just don't see anything there that isn't, that doesn't flow from the Fatima message.
Mhm.
If my requests are not heeded, well, look what's happened, folks. And we know that I think a lot of good people help to mitigate some of the things that might have happened
Mhm.
in this past century or more. But the reality is, we merited, if my requests are not heeded, and here we go, and there's 100 years. Well, and I think, the way these children, this was prior to any of those things occurring.
Mhm.
Okay, well, World War I had occurred, of course, but the Second Greater War, the annihilation of nations, all these other things. Well, that was possible future. They were focused on stopping it.
They were focused on what they were seeing and hearing, and Our Lady's words to them are so simple. They could understand, pray for those who have no one to pray for them, for many souls go to hell because there are none to pray and sacrifice for them. They could understand when they saw the Immaculate Heart surrounded by thorns that it needed reparation. They could understand the other things that they saw and heard, but that's why they were such receptacles of God's grace, because they were so open. They weren't bogged down by sin or teenage anxieties,
Right,
what they
right.
were going to do when they grew up, who they were going to marry. They hadn't entered that phase yet. Lucia would have to bear with all that. But Jacinta and Francisco could grow quickly in holiness. And Jacinta really demonstrates this, how she was so impacted by the vision of hell that Lucia said she had a divine obsession of wanting to suffer for souls that would go to hell. She had a divine obsession.
Yeah.
No,
And it was an obsession.
that's somebody who's already starting to reach the highest levels of consecration to Jesus through Mary, where they're willing to take on these extraordinary sacrifices.
Well, I think that's it. And I think you look at their short lives, and they knew their life was going to be short. Their lives are going to be short. And I mean, that to me is a great lesson for elderly people, older people in our age group who are closer to the end than the beginning. Let's be realistic,
Right.
okay? So now I want to finish out with a bang, okay? I want to do what I can, to participate in this Fatima message to the best I can. And I'm sure you have the same feeling. We have a mission in this apostolate, okay? So, we have to do our best to as much as we can, whatever time God has given us now to finish and to make reparation for the things in our own lives. Okay. I mean, what a gift that truly is. But to do what we can with the same mindset that somebody like these young children like Jacinta did. And I would think that in Francisco, but I would think also that was the motivator for Sister Lucia throughout her longer life. Okay.
Right.
To remain an example, to remain, that anchor of the Fatima message. And she reiterated, she did clarify things many times throughout those years.
Right.
That was her job.
Yeah. She had many years to ponder all of what had happened too, and to try to discern it through her prayer before the Eucharist, through her rosary, and then bringing it to her superiors, always seeking the guidance of her spiritual director and superior. She never operated alone. She never tried to discern things on her own. If you read her letter, she would always go to her superiors and say, if I understand correctly, this is what the Lord is saying to me. So she was always deferring to the spiritual guidance that she received throughout her whole life from the church.
Well, she remained very spiritual and holy. Okay. I know she, for example, we've been honored to work with the Sisters of Coimbra, the Carmel, where she lived for 50 some years, publishing the books with them. Of course, we worked together on that. And some of the special things that were given my many visits up there, a couple of times I've been taken into the gardens to see the cloister gardens. Okay. And Sister took us to the back to the statue where Sister Lucia every day would go and pray the statue of Our Lady. Okay, every day that she'd go back to praying a rosary and whatever. And it was and wow, how special to be there.
Right.
In that area, knowing that, throughout those many years, and as she was getting into old age, she was, she was obviously, I don't know, where would her mind go in those older ages? I don't know. It's very hard to say. I mean, she would say things here and there. She would communicate to people, and of course, she did. I mean, obviously, she was very prolific in what she did as far as her prayers, her writings. 70,000 documents are there. Let's be realistic. I mean, that's why her canonization process is not an overnight thing.
Right.
People say, well, why not just canonize her? Well, the Holy Father could do that if he so desired. But the reality is, the postulation, the positio, all of that, which is all very positive, still does not, they still have to review everything. That's the way it works. Okay. And with these children, it was so simple. I mean, with Jacinta and Francisco, it was so absolutely simple. They lived 2 years. They lived the Fatima message. They offered up their lives. And
well, one of the things that really led to their canonization was how they reacted in August to the possibility of being boiled in oil by the government official who wanted them to basically tell a lie and say all of this was fake. And they couldn't tell a lie, so they were willing to go to their death before they would tell a lie. And Francisco, after it was all over, who had already thought Jacinta was dead, when he was led away, he told Lucia later, I was filled with joy and peace, knowing that I would go to heaven soon. Well, that's the sign of a true martyr who's been given that great grace.
That's it.
Joy and peace before they're about to give their lives. So he had that at age 9 years old. I mean, really amazing.
Well, you see, that's my point. Well, one thing I disagree, and the church has their exact statements about things, but when they say that they're the youngest non-martyred saints, I think they accepted martyrdom. Okay,
they did accept it. Yes,
they weren't asked to fulfill it. Okay,
right.
But they accepted it. So they, in reality, by definition, wouldn't actually be considered martyrs. And again, that's a little bit of my pay grade here, but the point is, their giving of all, including their lives at that point, I mean, they did meet the requirements of martyrdom. And had they been martyred on those days, they would have been considered martyrs, bloody.
Well, they certainly were spiritually martyred. They accepted all their sufferings, and they would have suffered as long as Our Lady wanted. To the end. And both of them had, I mean, when you read about their deaths, Francisco's, he was suffering for many, many, many hours and days, and then at the end he sees a light at the door, and then he had a smile on his face that his dad said remained with him to the end. So he's the boy that died smiling.
Yeah, well, he knew where he was going. I mean, that's pretty
Yeah.
special. I mean, to have a guarantee of heaven, I would take that in a heartbeat.
There's a story of many people came to Francisco's bedroom to sit with him while he was sick, and they said there was something about him, felt like they were in church.
Yeah,
And
it
this
was like
lady
he
asked him
was.
to pray for her husband and son that they would be reconciled. Francisco said, "I'm going to heaven soon. I will ask on the day that when I get there." And the day that he died, her husband and son reconciled. So his prayer was answered that day. So her prayer.
Just the tremendous grace that they truly, as we move on about them, and of course historical things about them are beautiful. How do we, in your opinion, how do we as promoters of the Fatima message, okay, and how do we, bring to people what they need to take from this, okay? Okay, we're not children, okay, we don't live in a child's world, we don't live in a simple world. I mean, I've been to that village of Aljustrel, many times over the years, and even in 2023, it's not a whole lot more developed than it was in 1917, okay, 1916. It's a little farming thing. If it wasn't for the fact that tour buses come through and there's a few shops and that, but it's not a very commercial place. You can imagine what it was like in those hills. It was just in the middle of nowhere. They knew very little about the world, but God, did they know a lot? I mean, did they really come to understand a lot? Yeah.
Well, I think Francisco can really teach us that God is love and mercy. He was not afraid to approach him, even though he had seen this great light and he couldn't identify what God was because it was so beyond words. He was not afraid to approach the throne of grace and bring all these prayers to him. And like I said, he prayed confidently, but he always gave of himself before the Eucharist and humbly. So he spent that time with Jesus. So he teaches us adoration is important, and we need to spend that time with God. We need to be thinking about him. We can't go through our life never giving him a thought, and then we get to the end of our lives and now we need a priest. We should be thinking about him every day.
Every day.
Jacinta teaches us the self-sacrifice that it's beyond what many of us can even do. Even trying to fast on Fridays, it's hard. I get to 10 o'clock at night and I'm like, well, I'm either going to just go to bed so I can quit suffering, or I'm going to start hitting the kitchen.
Wake up at midnight and have something. Right.
So it's hard to take on sacrifices, but even when we wake up in a bad mood, we can offer that up to the Lord, and sometimes he will take that away. He'll help you get through that day. So to take on those sacrifices and to embrace everything that happens to us. I mean,
that's what it is. It's the little things. I mean, and that's what the Fatima message asks. Are you willing to offer your lives in prayer and accept things with submission that God allows to come your way for the salvation of souls, for your own sanctity and for the salvation of souls? And I think that honestly, and nothing is more efficacious than doing these things if you can in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Here we are now in this year of the revival, okay, the Eucharistic revival, a beautiful thing. And I think for us to, really understand the difficulty that truly brought the church to this point. Okay, I mean, if those figures are true, and I believe they are, that 70% of nominal Catholics don't even believe in the real presence, then they're not Catholic. Let's be honest, okay? I mean, you're not. I mean, that's one of the requirements to profess your faith, and then compare that to these children, Saint Francisco particularly, who was just so focused on the presence of God, on the hidden Jesus, being in church as much as he can, knowing that he's in the same physical presence. You see why the world and the church is a mess today. And doesn't that explain it? I mean, I think, I remember an Anglican who converted to the faith told me, he said, for the first half of my life, he said, I used to reverently go up and kneel down and receive what wasn't the body of Christ. Because now he says, I see people, very irreverently receiving the real presence of Christ, and that is really something to be pondered. How sad it is, that our church, in the real church with the real presence, that this is the case.
Well, I always tell people to try to remember the prayers that the angel taught, and to be saying those prayers during the offering of when the priest is lifting up the host, then you're offering the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And as you're going up to communion, say the pardon prayer. My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love you. Those prayers focus our attention on what's going on here and helps us to remain in a moment of adoration and worship and making reparation and appealing for the souls that aren't there and who don't believe. And so I always try to have people remember the prayers of the angel, learn them in your heart. You know, the children, when they heard that prayer, Lucia said it was indelibly etched in their memory. It took me a long time to memorize the angel prayer, but these children remembered it almost supernaturally and they never forgot it. So
well, again, they didn't read or write. Okay, so they had to
couldn't
learn
go
it
back and write it down.
They couldn't write it down, you know, but it was something that was was so I don't know. It was just etched, and they even said they don't know how they just have like inner impulses to pray these prayers, especially the prayers of adoration when they're prostrate on the ground, you know, with the angel. And you know, I think that that was, you know, reparation is comes from a heart of a repairing heart, a heart that wants to repair damage, right? You make it obviously, you know, these prayers, especially in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, and they are very efficacious. I mean, look at the value of a single Hail Mary said properly. Okay, look at, you know, just this, you know, we don't know the value of our prayers, and it certainly has to do with the you know, our true intent. Anybody can mouth words, you know, and that's why I get a little concerned about some people that get so concerned about the, you know, the structure of how something is done, prayer, or even mass. We don't understand it's what's in the heart of the priest offering and the people who are attending. That's what matters. Okay, you know, if we don't have that in our hearts, well, that's, you know, then we're going nowhere with it. Yeah, it really does. But I'm sorry, some things that Our Lady said to Jacinta, you know, and you say, you know, like we say, she never could have come up with these alone. You know, one, war is a punishment for sin. Well, that's logical, isn't it? You know, it's a response. You know, certain fashions would be introduced would offend our Lord, and those who follow him should not wear these. Well, look today how people are. You know, many marriages are not of God. Now, this is 106 years ago, 105, 104 years ago. She was being told these things. You know, and then priests must focus on their vocation as shepherds and be very pure. Well, you know, we're in a time of people not keeping their commitments. And it's not just priests, it's not just religious sisters or brothers. It's the world. Marriages. I mean, half of marriages break up, you know, even Catholic marriages. I mean, you know, where are we today? And in light of what this maybe a comment on this young girl and just the profound nature of these things that she brought to us.
Right.
Yeah.
She was being given these things that in her young mind, not having studied theology, not even understood many things of the church, was able to understand these, that Our Lady would tell her these things, a little child, and confide these things to her because she could understand them in light of the sinfulness of this and that they offended God.
Yeah.
She didn't understand how somebody got to that point. She didn't understand a divorce or a remarriage or other forms of relationship that are not marriage, but she understood they offended God, and that was what was most important. She also saw during the pandemic, while she would be laying in the hospital, and we kind of experienced this ourselves during COVID-19, she witnessed the godlessness and arrogance of the doctors because it was a very godless society, very atheistic.
Yes.
You were on a higher plane of elitism if you were an atheist. And she saw the arrogance of these doctors. And she said they cannot cure people because they do not have God in them.
Yeah.
She recognized that God is the divine physician. He would have directed them on how to help these people had they only been open to the divine physician, but they weren't.
Well, move ahead 100 years. And what was the first thing that happened to us? We were deprived our access to our churches.
Right.
Okay. I mean, you think about it, when we needed God the most. Okay, you know?
Because the virus only went to Target or Walmart.
Exactly.
Or it didn't go to Target and Walmart. It only went into
clinics or the liquor stores. There was no problem. You couldn't get the COVID there.
They knew exactly where that virus was floating around.
Right. It's pretty sad. You know, it'd be funny if it wasn't so sad.
Right.
You know, but you know, one thing that you know, as we're wrapping up here, before she left for the hospital in Lisbon, you know, she told Lucia, and here's her quote: "Tell everybody that God grants us graces through the Immaculate Heart of Mary. That people are to ask her for them, and that the heart of Jesus wants the Immaculate Heart of Mary to be venerated at his side. Tell them also to pray to the Immaculate Heart of Mary for peace, since God has entrusted it to her.
Right.
I think those are very profound words, true words, and profound from someone well beyond, her time, her age, and all. And I don't know. I just think there's so much we can learn. We can go out. We can talk about these two little saints for hours, But I think wrapping up, I just think we have to bring their spirituality into our hearts. I'll give you the last word on this. Yeah.
Well, Jacinta and Francisco both experienced a burning flame in their heart it was a fire in their heart that didn't burn them. And they wanted everybody to feel this fire that caused them to love our Lord and Our Lady even more. And so I just think they had reached these very high levels of spirituality, but we can examine their lives and how again, I just want to reiterate, they had such confidence in a loving Father, a loving Jesus who loved and had mercy, and Mary, a loving mother. So they were confident to approach these thrones of graces, and they always turned to our Lord, and they were obedient, and we should have that same childlike confidence in our heavenly help. So
yeah, absolutely, because if we're going to depend on our superior intellect to work things out, it ain't going to happen.
Right.
we have to strive for holiness, and we strive for holiness by truly accepting our unworthiness, to be honest. And the more we come to realize that, the more we accept the fact that we cannot do it ourselves. It only happens because God allows it. He grants us the good things, and he allows the bad to happen because this is all part of his plan. They understood that. So anyway, I think as we come up to this feast day of the 20th of February, where we celebrate these two saints. And by the way, why do we use her death anniversary as the here's Francisco. He even gave in to Jacinta for
Jacinta's death date.
the anniversary. But it's a beautiful thing, and they were very complimentary to each other. I think that's really what it was. Their spirituality, they gave us a lot, and I think we really need to keep these two, the spirituality of these two children in our hearts, because that is the heart we need to start with while we look to, like Sister Lucia, to give us more of the practical aspects of Fatima to go forward. So thanks for being on today, Barb. It was great. I think hopefully give a little understanding of these two saints of people. And we hope that all of you will subscribe to this podcast. Thank you, and God bless.